You know, being someone that's been with Pokemon since the get-go, it's kind of hard not to notice how Pokemon have changed in design over the years. I mean, Prime, you're a Gen 1 Pokemon yourself, surely you've noticed.
Of course I have. I mean, it scares me a lot, honestly, and it keeps me up at night. Oh, and don't call me Shirley.
Why on earth would Pokemon designs keep you up at night?
Well, I mean, ever since I turned into a Kabutops, I've been able to get to know other Pokemon, and by spending time with you, I've learned a lot about them too, but I just don't understand why there are so many other Pokemon that look different from me.
Well, quite simply put, I believe it comes down to a few things. Industry trends, artist preferences, and every game getting its own unique identity. I mean, even compare the new Pokemon that'll be making their way to Scarlet and Violet just about a month from now to Pokemon X and Y's roster from a decade ago.
Oh, is 9 years a decade? Did they change that? You make me sick!
Okay, watch the Tood, pal.
Is this how Poketubers treat each other?
No, but it's how I treat you, and you just need to get used to it. Anyways, let's not waste any more time and just get into how exactly Pokemon designs have changed over the years.
You know, I think it'd be interesting to start with Scarlet and Violet real quick, seeing how we've recently gotten a few more Pokemon revealed to us that not only are new on their own, but also related to previously known Pokemon. For instance, we have one Paldean form in Wooper so far, and a weird Pokemon called Wiglett that evolved to look like Diglett. Those clearly take inspiration from older, well-established Pokemon from the first two generations. And to build on that, they just introduced Firagarif. I hope that's how you say that. That must be, right? It's a new evolution to Girafarig. Once again, building off of a 20-plus-year-old design. When I look at these Pokemon, I definitely feel just how different they look from the starters, from those two new Fire-type Pokemon we got, and from our box art legendaries.
I hear what you're saying, but I do have to correct you a little bit there, Prime. Wiglett didn't evolve to look like Diglett at all. It's more like they both evolved and ended up looking like each other. Convergent evolution takes place when these creatures gain similar traits to fulfill similar needs. One's a mole while the other's an eel, completely unrelated, but because they both live their lives underground, they both developed these big honking noses because that helps them apparently. Anyhow, that's just the lore explanation for their similarities. The reality is that, yes, this brand new Pokemon looks very much like the Gen 1 Pokemon it's based on compared to some of its other Gen 9 mates. And the same goes for Girafarig's evolution Firigarif. But there are definitely some things that even separate them from these far earlier made Pokemon. Most noticeably, the shading, the line work, and the eyes. It's no secret that Sugimori-sensei was very inspired by Toriyama-sensei when designing the Pokemon and human characters in the very early generations of the franchise. From the triangular eyes, to the hairstyles, the sharper angles, to even the shading a little bit. Pokemon certainly has its own look for sure, but the inspiration is as clear as day. But as time went on and Pokemon grew larger, the way everything looked changed a bit. I mean, nowadays we see a lot of Pokemon with white pupils along with their colorful irises, which kind of reminds me a lot of Orikoshi-sensei's art style in Boku no Hero Academia.
I'd probably say it was around the 5th generation where things really started to enter the realm that we're in now. I recall seeing so many people comment that the Pokemon Unova looked downright fan-made, and of course the classic arguments about ice cream cones and garbage bags were rampant. I actually had no problem with them myself. Why, it was always just Pokemon, and quite frankly, it makes sense that they would eventually not just look like animals and whatnot. I think the proof is in the pudding with Voltorb and Electrode. They're basically just Pokemon that look like Pokeballs, so of course we'd end up having more and more Pokemon that look like man-made inanimate objects. It's just a natural progression of Pokemon to push the design envelope, make stuff that looks weird, challenge what was already established as the norm for designs, and then even go back to the old stuff and bring it back with a new fresh coat of paint. I mean, to take Wooper for example, its regional variant really isn't that different in design at all. It's more so just a change of colors and slight physical features. However, when you look at Firigarif, you can see that whoever designed it wanted to keep the spirit of its original design while definitely making an entirely new Pokemon that could be identified as such while not leaning on just being some regional variant.
Yeah, I never really did understand the inanimate object complaint from people that hate on new Pokemon. I don't understand why rocks with arms and Pokeballs with angry eyes are so much better than prankster keychains and haunted anchors. How about we accept that all of those are great additions to the franchise, or just admit you don't like a thing that you used to like anymore and not be so disingenuous. But touching on what you said about Gen 5 being the start of this new feeling and design, I think you've hit the nail right on the head there. Black and White were definitely like a soft reboots of sorts for the franchise, at least with their first sets of games, and the Pokemon feeling a bit more soft around the edges. But I think that comes from two areas really. One being the artist evolving their own art style over time, and two, how the industry tends to skew in terms of design preferences. On that first note, Sugimori-sensei has such a wide catalog of the different pieces that he's worked on, it makes it really easy to see what kinds of choices he makes when designing a Pokemon. He stopped leading the way for Pokemon designs around Sun and Moon, leaving it in the hands of his juniors Omura-sensei and James Turner. You can even see how Mr. Turner's own personal art style has changed over the years, becoming a bit more circular, symmetrical, and broken up in the line work. But yeah, I feel like when Sugimori-sensei took a back seat is when Pokemon started to really take another turn, not just aiming for a bit more roundedness in the designs, but also going really weird and redefining what a Pokemon could be. Alolan Exeggutor and Xurkitree existing in the same game, or at all really, is just wild, but shows exactly what I'm talking about here.
Hey, you said all that, and you didn't even bring up the industry trends. I'll just hit on those real quick, because I'm your right-hand mon. So, when we go back to 2010 and Pokemon began to take a softer approach in their designs, it was sort of felt across a lot of games. The Kinect was becoming a new popular device at the time, and if you check on a lot of those games, especially its launch titles, you'll see a set of very kid-friendly and easy-to-digest games in that kind of art style. Why, even if you break down the cartoons on TV at the time in the West at the very least, you'll see shows like Regular Show, Adventure Time, and The Amazing World of Gumball, and they definitely were going in a more soft direction. I can't speak entirely to what early mobile games were really looking like back then, but I'm sure at least those games that had crossover with the computer browser like Farmville also had that look. That brings us to today, where the industry is now starting to lean into a more graffiti-covered place with some grit and edge to it, in a way that you'd, expect to feel walking around in the nightlife of New York City. There's a lot of that feel with Scarlet and Violet, whether it be with Graphi or the new OLED Switch coming in November to accompany the new games. If you've been following recent gaming news, you'll see that the new Need for Speed game radiates that kind of energy, and of course Street Fighter 6 as well. I'm not too sure what's bringing upon this almost grungy era for gaming, but I'm just glad it's not a bunch of steampunk again, because god am I sick of that.
Oh, what's wrong? Does the old bug monster not like past and future mixed into one? Does it break too many conventional norms? I think the last thing I want to bring up here is that point on giving every game its own unique identity. At worst, Pokemon's core concept has stayed the same since 1996, but it's just flat out wrong to say that Pokemon hasn't changed with the times. Whether it be traveling to other dimensions, going even further beyond traditional evolution, or fighting kaiju, each Pokemon game tries to separate itself from the last. And I think the actual Pokemon designs have no exception there. You want each region, every piece of music, and each critter to feel shiny and new so you can walk away saying you experienced something new and refreshing. Sure, you have your Pikachu clones and your regional birds, but they all have their own feel to them that really separates them from each other. Or just take a look at Gen 6 and Gen 7. Both of them had a hedgehog Pokemon, but they couldn't feel any more different. Ultimately, I think it's always going to come down to what kind of aesthetic the team is going for and what the fans seem to respond well to. And clearly, as of late, fans have been responding really well to the weird and wacky direction. And who knows, maybe next generation there will be a big shift towards that more sharp style of the past, and we'll be seeing Pokemon that look like they were made 30 years ago rather than today.
So I think what we were able to really nail down here today was that I don't really need to think too hard about the way other Pokemon look. It's only natural that over time we'd stop looking like we were ripped right out of the sick and twisted mind of Akira Toriyama. The world changes. I mean, the things people like to look at change, and thus us Pokemon must do what we all know best. Evolve.
And evolve they have. The Pokemon we've had revealed to us so far are all so great looking and really have separated themselves from the rest of the Pokemon catalog, and it just has me curious what future generations will look like. But I guess I'm getting a bit ahead of myself there.
Hey, there's nothing wrong with the future. Why, I think about the future all the time, and how I can't wait to be human again and enjoy normal ice cream flavors and even hug my loved ones. It'll be fantastic.
Oh, was that an existential thought I just heard? I am having none of that. Seems you just don't learn. Back in the cage, man. I'm Collector Dexter.
Alrighty, and I'm the Prime Directive.
And we'll see you all next time.